go to where I live, and I'm going to dive right into this, you guys, because I think people can join, and I like to be respectful of time. But thank you. As always, welcome. I appreciate you guys being here. I'm super stoked for this conversation in particular because I believe that when we're able to navigate our fear in skydiving, not only are we safer for ourselves and others, we also are very much more likely to stay in the sport that much longer. Because if we come up against fear and we're not able to work through it, it's almost a certainty that people will leave. And so I love that this can be part of helping people really figure out how they want to best participate and engage in our sport in a way that makes them feel really good, such that they can make more friends and more memories and all of that good stuff over time. So that's kind of why I care about this. That's one of my big whys as to why I care about this. On top of course, just like I was saying, even connected to the push-up challenge, it's, caring about people and mental health and emotional well-being for humanity. I mean, I'm a big thinker type person, so there's that. All right, so I'm going to share my screen so you can see my sweet presentation that I made for you. So stand by to stand by. Pull it up and view it as a slideshow. Cool. I thought this was a good picture to start with. This is my friend Jim. But anyway, we won't stay too long on Jim. Just thought it was a good place. So as we go forward, guys, I would encourage you to pick something to work on. So maybe you have something, maybe you don't. Maybe you know a friend who's struggling with something in particular, or maybe it's something you've experienced in the past that you have been able to work through and you're currently in a good place. It really doesn't matter. I just invite you to think about something that's relative to you while I go through what I'm talking about, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about your stuff more specifically later on in the session. Sound fair? Cool. All right. So this is me. Yeah, I look very cool. You're welcome. I did my student training in Australia and I got my A license down there. And this is me. I probably have about 90 jumps in this picture. And obviously I'm rocking the sweet tie-dye jumpsuit with my socks pulled up over it. Please just make sure you notice that detail, that amazing detail of my fashion choices. So I do my student training in Australia, and it was my study abroad year for my college experience. So I go back from Australia to the US and I go back to college, and I'm in this art class, and I decide to use my main parachute as a sort of like an art installation. So I'm taking this art class, this installation or sort of studio art thing, and put it in this big space. It was really totally cool, to be honest. I wish I had pictures of it. I mean, someone might have pictures of it, but anyway, regardless, I do this. And I then am excited to go back to my dad's house, which is where I started to learn to jump. So for those of you who don't know, my dad owned a small drop zone, and I did my very first jumps at my house in the backyard, and that type of growth skydiving experience was how I started. So I get back from college and I am excited to go jump at my dad's house again as a now experienced jumper. So I take the parachute down from this art installation and I take it to my rigger and I say, hey, I need a repack. And I had this parachute off and I hooked it back up. Like, please check it, yada, yada, all the things that you would do when you're getting your gear sort of rechecked. So I get my gear back and I go to my dad's house and I'm like, yay, pretty excited about making my jump. I pack my main. So I'm again, relatively new. I'm packing the main and it feels a little weird. I'm like, this seems weird. I don't, but in my mind, because I was such a young jumper, I was like, nah, it's gotta be fine. as in like for my 90 or my 100 whatever jumps that I'd had, I everything was always fine, so it's got to be fine. Can probably see where this is going. So I get on the load, and this happens to be my dad had a Cessna drop zone, so it's me and a couple other people in the airplane. I'm getting out at the drop zone at the house, and the other guys in the load just happen to be going and doing like a beach demo jump or something like that. So I get out, I open up my parachute, and it opens beautifully. Awesome. My dad looks out the window, he checks, he sees, oh, she's got a good parachute, cool. And he and the other guys head out to this demo. So I look up and I'm like, yeah, I have a really awesome functioning main parachute that is attached backwards. So I have a beautiful mane. It opened perfectly. My dad was right. And it's flying this way. So, yeah, at that point in my skydiving experience, there's no way in hell I was going to land a backwards parachute. There wasn't even a question for me because I'm in this upstate New York environment. There's trees everywhere. But even if there weren't, I really didn't feel capable of safely navigating flying a parachute flying backwards, even though it was flying well. So I did it. That was time. I did it, emergency procedures. I pulled my handles and I ended up with a reserve over my head. And this was probably 100. I had 100 and I have to check my logbook, but I think I had 117 jumps at this time. So that's just something to note about that story in the sense that I knew something was wrong and I didn't speak up, right? I felt it was weird and I didn't ask anybody. I just was like, nah, it's probably fine. So I invite people anytime they feel those little pings of, is something wrong here, to just ask somebody because you probably are right, or worst case, you'll be able to get a little bit of guidance and support from someone who knows what's up to again, even if it is correct, it'll take that fear down a little bit from what you're feeling and the question that you have in your mind. So anyway, yeah. So I packed my main parachute backwards and jumped it, and that was my first cutaway. So I have my first cutaway, and then I go 7,000 jumps with no issues. So I count that as a really great thing. I mean, 7,000 jumps. Yeah, I had small issues here and there, but no major issues, so I really got into a place of comfort, with the parachute that I was flying. And that's logical, right? You have a bunch of experience where nothing goes wrong and everything's working perfectly. Great. So I'm now, by this time in my career, I'm flying velocities and I'm doing higher performance landings and this and that. So I jumped velocity lots of times. I had a ton of experience on velocities by this point. So one day I go for a jump, I throw out, and fuck, I have line twists. And so I'm lucky enough where okay, I get it together where it's not a high performance, like high speed malfunction. I get the risers together. It's over my head. So I've got it stable where I'm hanging underneath it and it's just sort of a low speed situation. Now, when this was happening to me, it was before the more universally known way to deal with this, where you guys may have heard about this, but when you put your risers together and you basically twist the risers to help the twist in the lines come down, and then you just spin out like a swing. If you don't, we can talk about that later on, but excuse me, but I didn't know how to do that at this point in my career. And it wasn't a thing really yet that people were doing, at least not to my knowledge. So I was trying the old school, just spread the risers apart, trying to kick out of it like a swing, and it wasn't working. It just wasn't working. I felt weak. Like I really felt like I couldn't muscle it. I couldn't get out of these line twists. And so decision altitude came, and yeah, I executed my emergency procedures and had my second ever cutaway. So that was good in the sense that I was really happy that I handled it well. I was happy that I was very aware in the experience. I was happy that I was altitude aware and that I executed my emergency procedures just as I had practiced thousands of times before. So that was encouraging. That sort of gave me a bit of empowerment, like, cool, I had some shit go down. I can handle it, even though it's been so long since I had that experience. The other thing, though, was that I also was worried about feeling weak, that I felt like, oh man, like that sucked. I really couldn't handle and get out of this situation that theoretically should be should be easy, or should be at least possible for someone to get out of. So after this experience, very shortly after this cutaway, I had another one. I had basically a duplicate experience. So it was like maximum a month, maybe a week or so. It was within days, a handful of days, like weeks, that I had a repeat of that experience where I got line twists, where I handled it, I got underneath it, and then I wasn't able to kick out of them. And that this third experience, or the third malfunction, that was more violent in the sense that I got it where I could get it under control, where I stopped it from diving, but as soon as I tried to do anything else to fix it, it would start to dive. And so with that, I had my third ever cutaway. And so if you think about it, you've got, okay, I have my first cutaway, 7,000 jumps with nothing. I have my second cutaway, and then bang, I have my third cutaway right away. So, one cutaway, 7,000 with nothing, two back to back. What do you guess happened to me after this experience? And feel free to unmute yourselves. I'm happy to have you guys share audibly on this session. What do you think happened to me? Or feel free to type it into the chat if that's preferred.
You freaked out?
Yeah, I freaked out.
Absolutely.
I got scared. Totally. I mean, obviously, this is
Yes.
a session on fear, but yeah, I got scared.
Oh, man. Of course.
I got scared, understandably so, right?
Mhm.
You have a problem on your main parachute, you have to go to your reserve, and then I'm now only one parachute away from injury or death, right? So that really is an understandable fear to come up and out of a cutaway experience for anybody who has one, including the empowerment feelings. So it's not that you're always necessarily going to feel afraid after a cutaway. It's just that because I felt the empowerment too, I also felt the fear. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this was back in 2012. And so earlier that year, my best friend, this is Jonathan Tagle, he's my best friend, and he had died earlier that year. He was doing some mountain flying and stuff like that. So he wasn't doing things that I would necessarily do or be at risk to die doing. But still, there was a piece of losing him that affected me, that sort of really magnified and contributed to this feeling of fear that I was having in the sport of skydiving at all, just holistically. This also happened to be a time where I had been working in the sport really intensely, traveling internationally, working really hard, like going to skydiving events and then coming back home and trying to run and open and build the life coaching business, and just really never having rest. So I was really burning out. So I was afraid from these cutaways. I was sort of afraid from losing friends and having things that were happening in the sport at this time. And I was also just exhausted and burned out. And so the fear that I would normally feel, because it's not that there's never any twinge of respect, right? There's high respect for our sport. So it's not that I would never feel fear, but because of these experiences, my fear started to grow roots. Like it started to get bigger. Like it started to almost like metastasize like a cancer, and it really, so instead of being excited for the coaching days and the training days and the boogie organizing days of work that I had on the calendar, I started to dread them. I would literally, no joke, this really happened. I would lose like 2 days minimum before having to go work at a skydiving job. Like I would be so drained by having to manage my fear of jumping that I would be like sort of in bed just watching fucking television and trying to write emails and stuff like that. But it was a really noticeably challenging emotional experience for me. And so as a result of that, I knew it wasn't sustainable. You know what I mean? Like it was just clearly not sustainable. Like I can't continue losing days of my life and feeling this feeling that I have, and because of the intensity of that feeling, I also knew that I was at very real risk of stopping skydiving altogether, and that's something I never would have ever thought, in the 15 years leading up to this experience. There's no way you could ever have told me that there would be anything that could tell that I could say or that would happen that would make me even consider stopping skydiving. And I was now faced with that feeling. So that brings us to the meat of today's experience is, so how do we get through it? Like, great, we have this like massive experience, or that we're facing fear, and mine just happened to be so significant. That's why I was forced into finding this solution. This is why I was forced into it. So it was either quit skydiving or keep feeling completely tortured or figure it out. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So my first question to you guys is, how do you identify fear in yourself when you feel it in skydiving? So how do you know that you're feeling afraid? Like what comes up for you? Gotta bring up the chat.
I think for me, Melanie, I guess I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead and just share audibly if you guys don't mind today, since we have a tight group.
Yeah, so I can tell, and actually even as you're speaking it, I can feel it, that fear, and it's a gut. It's just like my gut, sort of like that weight, and then my breath becomes a little bit shorter, so I have to breathe a little bit slower. But it's a physical reaction.
Absolutely. There are tons of different physical cues for sure. My throat tends to tighten up. So my throat will start to constrict. It'll be more difficult for me to breathe. So you're saying, okay, tighter chest. Anything else? Anyone else have anything to share with physical cues? Sorry, I froze for a second. Anybody else have anything to share relative to physical cues or the ways that they identify that they are feeling fear?
Heart, doing like this.
What'd you say?
Well, my heart.
Oh, your heart. Like your heart goes faster. Yeah, racing
Yes.
heart. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Anybody else?
Yeah, same as she said, racing heart.
Yep. Racing heart. Sometimes and this is weird, but sometimes my head will feel tight. Like it's so weird. The reason
I was about to say that.
Yeah, like my head will feel tighter. Sometimes I'll get a dry mouth. Sometimes my palms will sweat. Sometimes my whole body will be warmer. Like I'll feel, it depends on what I'm feeling and what I'm navigating, whether it's, public speaking or whether it's skydiving. So these are different. I think it shows up differently for different environments for people, but often there are ones that are across the board for people. Are there any emotional cues? Like, does anything happen? So my focus will tend to go like this. It will close in. Almost my visual field will close, but my mental ability to engage will lessen. Anything else?
I definitely not so much in, like I haven't as yet had like kind of massive fear in skydiving.
Cool.
Luckily.
Yeah.
Well, there's a respect, but like I think definitely like in other parts of my life, like the focus is like, rather than being able to kind of concentrate on what you're trying to do, you kind of start concentrating on other things.
Yeah. So an avoidant, like an avoidant behavior, totally. That's very insightful, because that can often be mistaken, or can often not be seen as being driven by a fear. That avoidant behavior, totally. Anything else on the emotional?
There's that let me make sure I'm off mute here. It's something like, it's sort of like time slows down. It's sort of like your frames per second, instead of being like 30 frames per second, your mind sort of processes like 120 frames per second. So something that's like 10 seconds will seem like 20 seconds, giving yourself more time to take in things and react and things like that.
Yeah, fascinating, right? The body is a fascinating thing. Our brains are a fascinating thing. On the emotional side of the house, just to share this, sometimes people experience, a shorter temper. Sometimes people cry more easily. That's usually me. If I'm really afraid, I'll be more fragile emotionally. So I've worked hard on that. Actually, I'm much more able to manage those emotional results from fear. But that was a big one for me for a long time, is that I would cry really easily if I was extra scared. Not necessarily in skydiving, but still something to look for. So I'm going to go back to the presentation so that you guys can see it. So yeah, the first thing is to feel it, right? The first thing is we have to know that we're feeling it. We have to identify those physical and emotional cues that we're having and go, that's me feeling afraid of something. So I may not know what it is yet, but that's what's going on with me. Right? So, because again, fear can be sneaky little sucker. It can hide. And again, sort of like what Chris said, it can manifest in these different ways, and we can maybe think it's not fear, but we want to make sure we're looking for these cues the way they show up for us. Sound fair?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So when we feel the fear, what we've, know how it goes, manifests in us, yada, yada. Then what? What would you say comes next? Or I guess this is really what I say comes next. But
Well,
any
I
thoughts,
remember.
any guesses? Yeah.
I remember my reaction after the fear. Actually, in the debriefing, I saw the video, and I got really scared then.
Okay.
Then, because I saw what happened in the air. I was spinning for 2 times, and I had a line twist. Okay, I knew what should I do, and I did it. Okay, but I think the most important then it's the blockage in the mind. If I'm telling that right.
Yeah, no, I love it. I feel like what you're describing is more identification of you're saying, okay, I feel it. And so that's awesome. This is all super useful stuff. Perfect. I appreciate that share. When we're on the trajectory of trying to get through it, right? So just identifying it is the first sort of thing. The next thing I would recommend, oh, and by the way, this is feeling the fear. You're welcome. This is a commercial that I did of an afraid soccer mom who then chases her Jack's Burgers that flings out the side of an airplane. It's ridiculous. But I'll share it. I'll share it after in the email after the class. But the next thing is to talk about it and to go to your trusted people and share. You know what I mean? To start a dialogue, to basically just start to really own and open up to the fact that you're having a challenge at all, right? To invite support of people who might have ideas for you. You know, it might be whatever, like, so, and that's the thing. That's sort of what I want to ask you next is like, why do you think I suggest this? Like, why do you think I'm suggesting that you go talk to people about it? What do you think would come from that?
And identify our fear.
Yeah, helping identify it more specifically. Yep. What else?
And mostly accept it.
Yeah, emotionally accepted. Yeah, exactly. You're not alone. You have support in this time when you need it, when maybe you're afraid to share about this thing, you feeling maybe stupid for even feeling fear at all or whatever, that you get this experience of support and trust in a party sort of giving you that space to explore this challenge. I love it. Anything else?
I think there's something about, just with frustration or anything else, is something that you're venting it. So it's sort of letting it out, and that sort of diminishes the fear a little bit. And then also vocalizing it in that and repeating it helps in a way to just kind of put it in a little bit of perspective, because you're putting it in a different point of view because you're actually expressing it into words instead of what you were just feeling inside.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be an experience of emotional distancing from the thought. You know, sometimes when we voice a thought, it sounds like it immediately diffuses it for us because we're like, wow, oh, that's, not to judge our thought, but just like, that this sometimes can diffuse it entirely by really just being like, oh, it's actually not relevant, and it's atypical that this is the spot where your fear diffuses, but it can. There's possibility of that happening, of me being like, oh, wow, that's completely just my old stuff. Oh, that's my old stuff. No, I know I can, whatever. Maybe it's land a parachute. Maybe it's go and be in a networking environment, whatever it is that we're worried about. Makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So,
thing about it too, Melanie, that comes
sorry,
to
Denise,
mind.
go ahead.
Yeah, so I always think about it like when you have a problem, if you don't talk about it, it's the elephant in the room. But if you just name the elephant, then you can start dealing with the elephant.
Absolutely.
Sort of like step of just look at it and like, okay, so now what am I going to do about this?
Absolutely. 100%. And that's part of it as well, is that we can get trusted guidance and start to think and find tactics and stuff like that. And this, of course, is a meme that you guys must see when we're talking to people. Funny memes are one of my core emotional supports in life. So I want to be generous and share them with you as well. So yeah, you guys are so on point. So the next thing, isolate the root concern, right? So that's the next thing that we want to do, is that, okay, we're acknowledging that we're feeling this way. We are being brave to talk about it and own it in a trusted space and trusted conversation. And part of that is en route to going, what am I actually worried about? Like, what am I really afraid of? As opposed to just like, I have this sort of blanket loose concern, you know what I mean? And then I don't really know what it is, and I'll just talk about it. But the next step is really going, okay, cool, I'm safe to explore. What am I worried about? And so with this, I would say to get curious, because curiosity by definition carries no judgment, right? So when we're curious, we're not failing because we have feelings. We are not, judging ourselves for having this experience. We're really in the work the mental and emotional work of wondering and starting to open our mind to what might be able to help us. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yes.
Cool. So going back to my cutaway experience, so I have this experience. I've got these 2 cutaways. My friend died. I'm tired, but really it was kind of like, all right, all of that stuff's going on. There's a complex, multifaceted, multi-issued situation in my life. So what more specifically was I afraid of? Was it free fall? I'm like, no, it really wasn't free fall. Was it other people? And I'm like, ha ha ha, yes, I'm always mildly afraid of other people. But overall I was like, no, not really, because I can handle myself and choose what environments I get into and what not, and yada yada. And for me, in this particular instance, it came back to the cutaways and very specifically opening, such that I was afraid of basically having more cutaways. I was afraid of having that experience that I really still wasn't sure how to fix about those line twists that I couldn't get out of. And so through the conversation and reflection, I was able to really zero in on, okay, once I have a functioning main parachute over my head, I feel totally fine. Like no problem whatsoever. I'm not worried about landing. I'm not worried about navigating the pattern. I'm not worried about any of that stuff, right? I really thought about each of those, like the building blocks of our skydiving experience, and tried to isolate what was really the emotionally charged piece for me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you for saying yes.
I'm listening.
All right. So we
Melanie,
isolate. Yeah, go ahead.
no, just a quick one. Did you have a fear of pitching, or was it like, was it like,
No.
I don't want to pitch, or was it kind of,
No. Yeah, good question.
like,
Yeah,
now what?
great question. And we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go forward, but it was for me very much the deployment sequence. So like, it wasn't that, I mean, yeah, I was nervous. I got afraid when I would throw out, but only because I knew I then had to go through the basically the inflation sequence. So it was really mostly about inflation. And because like I threw out fine, and in the inflation process is when I had the issues, right? That's when the line twist kicked in, right? So it was that. So once it was open, I was fine. Sound fair? Okay, so we're getting curious, we're isolating the root cause, and we have this fear, we've talked to our people. What do you think we do next? You probably will never get this, just so you know, because this is very me, next thing. But I'm putting it in here anyway. Any guesses? Or should I just tell you? I'll just tell you.
Yeah.
My next thing is that we validate ourselves. So, and this is the life coach in me, basically wanting to care for the challenge of this experience, the emotional challenge of what this is. And so validating ourselves is basically normalizing why we would feel fear in the first place, and just saying to ourselves, it's completely understandable. It's totally normal that if a person had 2 cutaways back to back and they didn't know how to fix it, that, yeah, it makes sense that you would feel afraid, right? To really normalize that and to take away any self-judgment that you might be feeling for feeling fear in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that part this is a part, and again, it's very much in the life coaching realm of the work that I do, but this piece is powerful to help us with the remaining steps, because if we can do anything to bring our fear, just diffuse it any even small amount, So if we can use validation and sort of self-love and care and kindness to remove that magnifying glass of self-judgment and just take away a little bit of that pressure cooker feeling when we're in an experience that we can't figure out, that really gives us even just a little bit more energy and a little bit more brain space to figure it out. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I like to think of validation as like a hug for yourself. I'm like, it's like you're giving yourself a little bit of love, and it's not false is the thing, right? Because like me just going, it's okay, Mel, it's good, you're cool, that's great too, don't get me wrong, that's a different webinar, which I'm happy to do, but validation and self-love in the sense of really normalizing an experience speaks to the details of why is it really logical that you're feeling this? Why is it totally normal? And why would anyone else in your shoes probably be feeling the same thing? Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically you going, okay, I'm not a loser. You know, it's kind of taking that off. All right. So what would you say is the next step? We know we're feeling it. We've talked to our friends. We've been in conversation and reflection. We're isolating this root cause. We've validated ourselves to sort of keep ourselves able to be moving through the process. What's the next step to figuring this out?
To work with this, with this fear.
What'd you say?
To work with this fear, to be more close with the fear, so we start to know it better, and eventually acknowledge it. Sorry about my English because I don't speak every time.
It's totally fine. I love that you're sharing. I appreciate it. Yeah, you know, those details I would say come out when we're in that reflective process and we're in that conversational process, when we're getting to more intimately know the fear. That's what I would say is more step 3. But you're on the right track in the sense that that's really necessary part of the process. The next thing I would say is we brainstorm solutions. So if I've identified, you know, that it is inflation, you know, like I've got some specificity to my situation here, right? Then we want to really think about, okay, cool. I know we've thought more critically about this. Now, what can I do? You know, what might I be able to do about this thing, you know, that I'm worried about? Just really start to go, all right, cool. I know what it is. Great. Now, again, in that space of non-judgment, in that space of openness, it's like, what can I do about it? What might work? And notice I keep saying might. What might work? As in, I don't know if it's going to work. You know what I mean? I'm just, and that's the sort of nature of a brainstorm, is that, again, there's no judgment. There's just openness to go, this is a place where I can throw proverbial paint on the wall and think about what might help. So what might I be able to do differently? What might I want to do more cautiously? What might I want to do more slowly? You know, is there any change I can make to my gear? Any boundaries for decision making I want to think about? Like maybe I don't jump in certain weather conditions that I maybe would have jumped in the past. Like starting to really look at all of these potential competing factors that might influence the fear, and thus changes or tweaks we can make in those sort of specific avenues of influence on our skydiving experience. That make sense? Cool. So for me, it was about this inflation moment, right? This opening, like, okay, my parachute's opening, but it's not yet there, square steerable. I can't land this thing yet. So this is basically when I'm freaking out. This is the moment. I'm like, let's just ignore the fact that I'm in a wingsuit, which is totally not something I do anymore at all either. So there's like double freaking out going on in this picture. So with all of that reflection for me, because of this, I made the choice, and it became clear to me that I wanted to step back from high performance parachutes for a while. That I was like, even though I have thousands of jumps on velocities and I have thousands of jumps where it opened just fine, I was afraid, and I was okay with that. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll go off them for a while, maybe, or whatever. But I felt really clear that I needed to change my parachute for a while, just so that I could get through this intense fear that I was feeling. So, make sense? Cool.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So part of that was, and again, in this brainstorming of solutions part of this process, I was like, okay, cool. So if I change parachutes, what would I do? You know, I own a katana. Like, I owned a katana 107. It was in the closet. It was pretty much brand new. So I was like, oh, okay, I could jump a katana. And I was like, oh, I have thousands of jumps on stilettos. I loved my stilettos. Those are always awesome. And so I was like, okay, cool. I'll try that. So I, you know, busted out the katana. I hooked it up. I got a demo from PD, and I got, you know, a stiletto demo that I could try just to, you know, refresh my memory. How did it feel, you know, to jump that parachute? And I'll let Kelly back in. Oh, sorry. So, sorry, I wanted to let Kelly back in. I saw her, you know how you admit people in Zoom. So anyway, so I did that. So that's basically what I did. You know, I got these two parachutes. I got them to the point where I could jump them. And then I went and I did the next step, which was I tested the solutions, right? I got to the point where I'm like, cool, these are some ideas that I like the idea of. I think it's a good idea for me to test other parachutes. And I don't know if I'm going to like the katana or the stiletto more. Maybe I won't like either of them, but these are things that I at least feel good about going. Those are things I can at least test to see if they make a difference on how I feel. Does that make sense? So in testing the solutions for me in this whole experience of this sort of intense fear that I had, I jumped, like I said, I jumped the katana and I jumped the stiletto. And in so doing, it delivered me more data to make more choices and make more decisions. And the katana, as awesome as it was, and I had, you know, over 1,000 jumps on a katana because I jumped a katana for a whole season. And what I didn't like about it was that it had a longer, snivelly, more soft opening. Some people would love that. You know what I mean? It had this long, gentle inflation sequence, and I didn't like that. What I liked was I really liked the snappy, quick inflation of a stiletto because it got me more quickly, most quickly, through that period where I was most afraid. And I also had quite a bit of experience on stilettos. So it was also a sort of high confidence zone when it came to parachutes. So that ended up becoming my answer, was to basically start jumping stilettos again. But before we go to rounding out the whole of the story, is that basically the number 7 part of this, the last thing that I would invite you to consider when you're in this type of process is that, yeah, I was testing the solutions and I was jumping the katana and I was like, it's not really working, right? So I was jumping it and I'm like, yeah, it's okay, you know, but it's not really working. Like, this is the katana and it's an awesome parachute, but it wasn't really helping me feel fully released from the worry I had about that part of my skydiving experience. And so the next thing that I would say is to repeat. So you repeat parts of this process. So if it's, maybe you're like, oh, maybe I haven't even isolated it. I don't feel like I'm on point with how I've isolated the actual fear. So, okay, maybe I'll go back and I talk to more people about it, you know, and I try and I go back to that reflective process, both with others and with yourself. And maybe you isolate more clearly what it is. For me, I had already done that. I had really achieved that in this process. So it really was about that inflation for me at that time. So, excuse me. So when I jumped the katana and it wasn't really working, I kind of had to go back and test more. You know what I mean? So I had to be like, okay, the katana's not really working. I own it. Let's do that demo of the stiletto and let's test that. Right? So you kind of want to go back to whatever point in the process you need to sort of re-engage to get the clarity you need to get back to testing solutions, right? To get back to solutions that you can then put into actual action. And then, because ideally, when we are testing the solutions, ideally they lead us to the full diffusion of our fear. And that's, again, what happened to me is that I ultimately decided to jump stilettos. And I'm so glad and grateful I made that decision, you guys, because, and listen, flying high performance parachutes and swooping when you have those skills is fun as fuck, guys. And I say that with real love of that part of my skydiving experience. I still miss that sometimes. Not that you can't fly any parachute at a fun sort of high performance way if you have the skills, by the way, again, if you have the skills and coaching to do that. But it was something that was important for me to let go of so that I could continue participating in skydiving at all. Right. And so now, I mean, and I just have to highlight that this happened in 2012. So it's been 8 years that I've been flying a stiletto and I still fly it today. But the reason I'm so glad is that it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. Like, had I not done that, I would have very likely left the sport because that feeling is so not sustainable, but I wouldn't have been able to go and jump at the fucking pyramids, for God's sakes, right?
Last year.
That's my stiletto. It's like my favorite thing ever. And that is one of the most incredible experiences of my life, not just skydiving. And it's all because I was willing to work through this process. Similarly, I wouldn't have been able to fly my stiletto into the Montana forest for this amazing group of change makers working to make the world a better place. I wouldn't be able to be on Highlight, our new women's demo team that is now forming and building and making impacts on young girls' lives. Like, none of that would have happened had I not really done the work through the fear that very easily could have crippled me out of our sport. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So back to you guys. So let's stop the share for a second. Let's go back to you guys. So what were you guys thinking of at the start of this call, if anyone's willing to share or wants to share? Like, what came up for you throughout this process? Feel free to share anything, any insight or anything that might be useful or something you'd like my take on. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Actually, whoever just spoke up, let her go first. I like going
Patty,
second.
was that you?
Yeah, it was me. Are you sure?
Yeah, I like going second.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. So the reason I'm here is because I am petrified of the landing.
Okay.
And petrified is possibly an understatement.
Is there a reason why? Did something happen?
Yeah, I celebrated my 60th, 60, like in 60. Yeah, jump, breaking my femur in two, like literally. I broke it in two pieces.
Yeah.
Like in completely broken. So there's a fun side to that, which is that, man, you would never know how awkward that thing feels when you're trying to move your leg and you feel like you have a ghost leg, because that's actually how it felt.
I bet.
I guess I had so much adrenaline in my system, and I am not really too much of a religious person, but I really think I have a little guardian angel that works overtime. throughout the whole process, I'm going to be very honest, I did not feel pain. I was cool, calm, collected. I didn't lose consciousness, whatever. Through the whole thing, the people came, picked me up, took me to the hospital. I had surgery, woke up, spent a couple days in the hospital, came home, and I've been working through the rehab. So 5 months and 1 day ago, this eventful thing happened.
Wow.
And I'm stuck. I before it happened, my worst fear was breaking something, because I am a wuss. I am a very, very woozy person who can't really understand how the heck I ever thought of jumping out of planes. I don't even run because I'm afraid I'm going to fall down and hurt myself.
Okay, I love
And
it.
here I am, right? So broke the leg. The bone is healed. The muscle still need a little bit more strengthening.
Yep.
I am a lot stronger today than I ever was before the accident. I mean, I can lift heavier weights. I've put everything I've got into rehab, but I'm wondering.
Yeah. Well,
I'm wondering because landing is inevitable, right? Once you're out the door, I have no other way to go. So
exactly.
that's that.
Well, Patty, first of all, I fully acknowledge you for being willing to share. Again, you're in the process, right? You know you're feeling the fear, and now you're talking about it in trusted spaces. So that from just first is amazing and wonderful. And so being in this process, we're now in it real time, going, okay, cool. So immediately, as sort of a teammate of yours in this type of process, in this type of conversation, aiming to isolate the root cause, you were like, okay, I've had this fear. I'm super afraid. I've always been afraid of hurting myself. I won't even run because I'm afraid of hurting myself. I would be curious, why? Is there any obvious reason why, or is that just some mystery fear that you feel like you've always felt you had?
My mom, I guess, the way how I was raised, my mom would be always like, oh, don't do that. You're going to hurt yourself. Oh, don't run. You're going to hurt yourself. Oh, no, God forbid, you're going to break a leg, or, right? So you kind of like grow in this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So in looking at that, totally normal. It doesn't mean that if we have an awareness of that, it immediately just disappears, right? And this is stuff that we see in the life coaching work and personal development work that I do all the time, is that we can have an aha moment and be like, oh shit, that's why I'm doing that. And then not be able to change that pattern for a while. So same thing with mindset and thinking. It's just because we see that a fear is at play doesn't mean it's going to go away instantly. So that's great in that we know it. And so you're like, okay, the ground makes me afraid. My meeting the ground, that moment of when I meet the ground, and correct me if I'm wrong if the language is not accurate for you, but that's what it seems like to me. So if it's really about I'm afraid of hurting myself, I don't feel like I hear I'm afraid of hitting the airplane, or I'm afraid of hitting someone else. It feels like you're afraid of you hitting the ground in some way that causes injury.
Yep.
With your rehab process, was that painful and not fun for you? I mean, it seems like it would be obviously not, but I don't want to assume anything.
Well, there was a brief period of time where, you tell your body, hey, leg, we're going. And your leg tells you, you got a rod in here, lady. I'm still broken.
Okay.
And you're like, no, leg, we're going. And the leg is like, yeah, you didn't hear me, right? So for a brief period of time, for a very brief period of time, I wondered if I was ever going to be able to go and walk around the block without the walker or the cane. But that was just a brief period of time due to, I want to think, my lack of understanding of the healing process and how your brain can command one thing but your body still knows better. And my body still knew that I was walking on a broken leg by virtue of a rod, not of a mended bone.
Got it.
So your body is like, no, not yet. And yeah, I mean, but overall, if you ask me, and I don't want to sound delusional because I fully understand the extent of what happened. I mean, I've seen the X-rays. I know exactly what happened and how it happened. But it wasn't really as bad as I thought it was going to be. I thought a broken bone was going to hurt like hell. Well, again, no, I was very fortunate. No. So now, lifting the weights and everything might have been just like the most inconvenient piece. But I mean, as you start getting stronger and stronger, and you just like when you start going to the gym after not going to the gym at all, which was my case, I hadn't lifted in 20 years. And I'm just like, how on earth did I ever think I could just become a weekend skydiver and have the strength to maneuver my parachute, right? To pull on those risers or the toggles, or have the strength to run a landing when my legs, really, Patty? That's
well,
myself, right?
And Patty, there's a lot here, which is great. And that's always how it is, right? Like if you can see it in my story as well, like I've got all these competing forces of what is causing the emotional charge, and all of them likely have impact on your experience. What I like that I heard is that it sounds like in the healing process, you're having some awakenings to, okay, this isn't actually as bad as I thought it would be. My fear magnified it, which is very common, right? I mean, shit, you can see that in just resistance. I can see that in my resistance to vacuuming my house. It's like, oh, I fear that it's going to take me forever and I'm going to be tortured by it. And it takes me 8 fucking minutes and it's over, and it's all my mind made it up. Right. So I like that you're starting to get a little bit of distance from the maybe childhood induced, you're going to hurt yourself stuff. Cool. Doesn't necessarily solve it, but at least maybe it's diffusing it a touch for you. And what I also like is that it sounds like you've maybe been doing a little bit of loose, open brainstorming about your stuff on your own by going, what might I need to do to feel confidence going into skydiving again? I hear you talking about physical strength. I hear you, talking. And so I would invite you into that and go, let's get real with ourselves. If you really think being stronger will help you feel more confident and safer, I would really try to figure out how to make that a reality for yourself, right? And I would also invite you, and I don't want to necessarily do this right now because I want to have more time to talk to other people, but we can come back if we have more time.
Yeah.
Is invite you into discussions with people who know exactly what happened on your landing so that you can really get a hearty, clear debrief on what you did that that contributed to you actually landing in the way that you did. The other thing I would consider is, again, on the line of gear and going, there are lots of parachutes out there. We can choose large, docile parachutes. We do not have to jump a 190 just because that's what we jumped before. You could get back on a freaking student rig if you wanted to. Like, there are ways to inch back into the sport and to inch back into doing the things that we are afraid to do. Now, there's different complexities that go into changing your parachute in a major way. So you would definitely need coaching around that, right? Like if you're current on a 190, I wouldn't want you jumping a, student 260 on a windy day. Like you would have to get coaching on and talk about and think about how the different characteristics of that parachute was going to function for you, where it might be, and really be prepared for that difference as well. You know what I mean? But overall, it's more forgiving than something smaller. Make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
So those are some things to consider when it comes to that specific moment, and so go and talk to those people and go through this process with them too. and if we can come back, but let's just stop there for now. But I love it. It's a great example and very common for people to feel fear post-injury, getting back into the sport. So yeah. All right, Steve, go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to say to Patty, I also broke my femur. It was when I was 8 years old. I wasn't skydiving, but I do remember what you said about that ghost leg feeling like that. And so that's I think that's the biggest bone in the body to break. It might not be as like breaking a back or anything like that as far as rehab or anything like that. I also wanted to add that because what I'm about to discuss is I had an injury myself, and what I'm confronted with, you know, I think the root problem for me is fear of landing. And one thing that, you know, I decided my brainstorming was really work on PLFs. So that way, you know, coming into the landing, worst that can happen is you'll go into that PLF and you've done it 100 times or 200 times, and you'll know, like, you'll be okay if that's the worst case scenario. But that, having said that, backing into what Melanie said about debriefing with what your instructor said, but I still think learning PLFs is good no matter what. So my situation, I went skydiving down in Florida for 2 weeks last year, and I was, you know, I took the auto train down there. I brought my rig with me. I went to 4 different drop zones. I was just, you know, skydiving all over the place. I went to 2 iFlies, and I was so determined to skydive that in the land, they had like really high winds, but I was like, oh, 20 miles an hour wind. I was like, I need to do that to learn how to fly in high winds. Oof. And that's when I hurt my ankle. And then I had a hurt ankle. And then a couple of days later, I went to wind tunnel, and then I smacked it against the wall trying to sit fly, and hurt it again. But I had plans to go skydiving again. So there I was with an ankle, and I already went to urgent care, and they told me stay off it for 5 days. But after 3 days, I was like, hey, it's just a landing. It's not like I'm going running or anything like that. So, but there I was like, let me practice some PLFs. And I was practicing in my apartment on a hardwood floor. And after watching videos, I'm learning how to do it correctly. Now I was like, man, I did it all wrong. No wonder I hurt my shoulder. So today, I mean, it was a milestone for me. I actually hit my 6-month part from my operation. I, you know, literally just came from my orthopedic surgeon this morning, and he says, hey, you're good to skydive. I'm not fully recovered yet. He says that's going to be 9 or 12 months before I'm like fully strong and not feeling anything. Yep. But he said, yeah, we're okay to skydive. Only problem is things are closed around here as far as Skydive Orange and nearby things. Right. So, but I'm still confronted with the landing, but also I just have this feeling like when I'm coming in for a landing that I'm going to panic and have a bad landing. And if you don't mind, I want to, can I share content?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Photos.
Yeah. And so again, guys, just to, while Steve's pulling something up, I want to continue to highlight and this goes back to Chris's question for me, was asking about is that when you hurt yourself?
Yeah, this was actually, as you see, I got it's a 7-cell PD Spectre. And it was my first rig that I bought, and I really didn't even know what a Spectre was when I bought it. I just, the container matched my jumpsuit. And so jumping that Spectre, it's like I land every other landing standing up. Otherwise, it's kind of a face plant or something like that. Okay. So I actually spoke with Kevin Ho, who y'all know, who you may know. He's, you know, he works out of Orange, and he made the USPA canopy team. And he had a Zoom conference a week or 2 ago, and we discussed this and also talked about upsizing my canopy and just getting to get more comfortable also, since I haven't jumped for 6 months. And so I think with that and learning my PLFs, I'll be on the track to getting to some safer landings.
Yeah.
Stop the share here. You got it.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, no, I just brought us back. No worries. That's good. I mean, again, it sounds like you're in the process, but what I was going to say, sorry, before your photo came up, was what Chris's question for me is he was asking into the detail, the nuance of the thing. He's like, was it when you actually threw out? Was it, you know what I mean? Like really. And so that's why with you guys thinking about your landings and going, okay, it's not just the ground, but let's think about the skydiving experience that is happening relative to the ground, right? Are you looking down? Are you looking up? Are you, like you said, am I not breathing? Do I tense up? Do I completely go, you know what I mean? Like stop breathing when I'm on my final approach and I'm still 300 feet in the air, right? Do I pull my strings down in an asymmetrical way? You know what I mean? What have I done historically? What is, you know what I mean? Like trying to learn and figure out which thing we could even further isolate, you know what I mean? To help you guys feel that much more prepared for that moment. Does that make sense? So whether we're upsizing, whether whether we're breathing, whether we're visualizing, and again, you guys both sort of have briefly touched on something that's also important, is that if you're consistently thinking, Patty, I'm so afraid I'm gonna hurt myself, or Steve, if you're thinking, oh my God, I'm just gonna eat shit, right? Then
I'm scared I'm gonna
reinforcing
panic on
those
my way
things.
into landing, and that's obviously
that's what you said. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So like reasserting that that's going to happen. So Dan BC did a really awesome visualization session the other day, but really visualization makes a difference. Like our brain does not know the difference. So if you can really visualize your landings, you know what I mean, and visualize what you're going to see, that can help as well.
I have a question about that. I missed that session. I was going to go to that. Did that somehow get recorded, and is it available?
I think it is. I'll find it and share it if it's out there and available. Yeah, no worries. But okay. Does anybody else want to share before we run out of time? Happily hear from anyone. Yeah, Panayota, go for it.
When that happened, I did a lot of wind tunnel to practice my flying, my skills in flying.
So what happened with you?
I got spinned 2 times.
Oh, so you're in AFF and you're spinning?
Yes,
got it. Okay, go ahead. So you get in the wind
tunnel. I went to the wind tunnel. At first, I was so much afraid because of the vision of that bad jump. Okay. It took me some hours to fix my position.
Sure.
I changed personal trainer because I found a problem with my shoulders.
Okay. So you're correcting symmetry with your body.
I did some NLP coaching.
Great.
About fear.
Yep.
And when I was ready to go back skydiving, I had an injury. I broke my wrist.
Okay.
But that was out of skydiving. Okay. So I'm now very curious how those things I tried, it will be on air. When drop zones are open.
Yeah. Your question is how?
I want to try those things I learned, my skills.
Yeah.
I don't know how the exit would be the next time.
Yep.
Of course, I will be in the beginning of AFF again.
Yeah.
But that's okay with me because I think these things that happened to me, it was really a gift to find out what it was wrong about me. And at the same time, back then, my ex-boyfriend was a coach in this drop zone, and I was in emotional pain. So this was this was an awakening part for me. I didn't think I would be in emotional pain while I was in the sport I like, but I got so much info together. I watched the visualization with Dan BC the other time.
Oh, good.
And I was in that before I watched the Zoom meeting. So I'm trying to do these things alone in my room, you know.
Good. Yeah.
Do you have anything to tell me in order to help me about this, apart from those 7 points you...
Yeah. Some specificity. Yeah, right? I mean, the process is the process, but engaging the process is actually what gets us the specificity, right? So like this conversation now that's talking about you guys is you actually doing the process, right? So I'm basically setting it up for if we run out of time today and you don't get to talk to me about this or whatever, you can talk to other people. You know what I mean? And by the way, guys, and I don't like to, I still to this day don't like sharing the things that I do. It's like so awkward, but I do lead an online skydiving coaching group that you're welcome to join at any point. It's like $5 a month because I just like, I make people buy into it because I believe that helps them engage in it more. But if that is certainly where we can expand discussions like this, but again, no pressure. It's just that that's available if you ever wanted to be in a week like that.
Well, I saw that, Melanie, but I wanted info about that.
Yeah, no worries. I'll tell you later. But let me just tell you some specific stuff about what you're asking about. One thing that I think is important that you shared is that, and again, it sort of goes back and it mirrors my story a little bit in that there were lots of competing charges. And so, you know, gosh, even it might seem totally unrelated, but if you're experiencing a heartbreak and you're having some emotional pain in your life at some time, for whether it's loss of a relationship or death of a friend or whatever, that does impact our ability to function in a high level environment, period.
Especially if your ex is threatening you.
Well, goodness gracious, that is a different webinar and that is not acceptable or cool. So I hope, no, meaning I hope that you've extracted yourself from that environment because that's not okay. I give that a thumbs down. But the reason I bring that up is that being aware of when we have limited bandwidth because of life circumstances, that matters, right? Because if we're already trying to really be in an experience, skydiving, that requires our focus, and we're working through a fear that is challenging us, we have less bandwidth because of our life, we have to basically really be mindful of, okay, this is making my bandwidth less. How can I make my bandwidth more? And that's why we talk about getting super clear on what it is. Maybe it's flaring and you do a fuck ton of visualizing on flaring and visualizing your landing. Maybe it's upsizing like we've talked about. Maybe it's, again, having patience when the weather is a certain way. Like I only will jump when there is literally 10 knots from this direction. You can make those types of choices. You can increase your bubble to allow it. And it takes longer. And this is part of it that I didn't really mention, is that this process that I shared with you guys, that was over the course of a year, 6 months, maybe at the minimum, but it takes time. to work through this process. So be patient with yourself and try as much as you're young and at any point in your skydiving, really. I mean, I had, again, 8,000 jumps at this point in my career, and you want to move through it quickly. You want it to be over. You know, you want to feel good again. And so there's this like, I want to rush, and you really have to work against that feeling, because that will only get you into further trouble. So that's the whole thing, like, really be patient. So for you, Panayota, I would say that it's great that you're visualizing. It's great that you've gone to the wind tunnel. If you can do more of that, that's excellent.
I'm back flying in the wind tunnel now.
So doing that is great. And then when you go to jump again, do your best to focus on one or two things, and that's it. Don't be like, I have to land this, and I have to exit perfectly, and I have to this, and after that I have to focus on a couple of things. That
one step at a time.
Yeah,
because
like really.
Skydiving has a lot of things together.
That's what I would say, given where you are in your skydiving trajectory, given you're still in the AFF student process, keep it as simple as you can, and that will build. Okay? Cool.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else want to share before we close up shop? Chris or Denise? You don't have to. You can totally just chill.
Melanie, before you any closing comments you have, what are your thoughts on I don't know, are your drop zones in you jump out of Cross Hill?
Is my home drop zone, yeah. I mean, we're still closed up. I mean, New Jersey's fucked.
Yeah.
So
what's your thoughts about people going on road trips? I was thinking about going to Suffolk myself, or just waiting it out for 3 or 4 weeks.
Well, Steve, I want to give Denise a chance to speak. I think she unmuted herself. So let's address that outside of this session, but it's a worthy question for sure. But Denise, you had unmuted yourself. Do you want to share?
Yeah. So if there's noise in the background, I apologize. We're having some work done on the house today.
No problem. It's chill.
Hopefully it's not too bad. But I'm curious, Melanie, because maybe you can help me kind of work through what's going through my mind. Because what you said about isolating the problem really stood out at me.
Cool.
And I never had a major event that happened. I didn't have twists or horrible landings or anything like that. But early on in my skydiving career, I had this one thought that just popped through my mind of like, you can do everything right, but laws of probability, random chance, something can go wrong. Mm-hmm. And like, well, the more you skydive, the more that random chance increases, right? It's playing the odds. Mm-hmm. And early into my skydiving career, it was like, well, that's all right. I don't have that many jumps. But the more jumps I had, the more that started coming back and coming back and coming back. And I don't think that's really the root cause of it, because that's not how I live my life. I do statistics for a living, so I know the math of it.
Yep.
But I don't like risk assess things. I go with my heart and my gut, which is why I'm still skydiving, because I love it. So that's not the root cause of it. I know that's always niggling. Like it could.
Yeah, and is it diminishing your joy in the skydiving experience? I would guess it is.
Yeah.
Okay. And so how is that manifesting? Like, meaning it's diminishing your joy, but is it meaning, are you signing up for fewer events, or are you just, when you're at events, you're disconnected socially because you're not able to access your own radiant light self? You know what I mean? Like, how is it that when you exit, you're actually afraid? You know what I mean? Like, where does it show up in your skydiving?
I would say two things. One, another thing that you said resonated, of dreading things. So I'm still signing up. I'm on a team this year. You've seen me on the big ways, the camps and things like that. So I'm still trying to do it, but I dread it to the point where I have cried over going, but I still showed up. But yeah, the whole time I'm afraid. So I'm not even flying the way I know I can fly. My flying is shitty because I'm holding myself back because I'm scared.
That's totally understandable. And again, I would definitely, similar to everyone else, I would instantly get more curious of like, and this might sound weird, but like, what are you really afraid of? Are you afraid you're going to die? Are you afraid you're going to be like, because some people are more afraid of death, other people are more afraid of serious injury. And then we can start to like, and I would ask that. I mean, if you want to share, please share. Are you afraid of dying? Is that the fear that you'll leave your family and your mom will be very sad? Like, what is it that you're worried about?
It might sound really stupid because we know that's the risk of the sport, but yeah, I think that's it. Like, I'm afraid that that one random day is going to be that day.
It's totally not, it's totally normal. Like, I mean, and again, I go back to that validation piece, but it's real. The validation piece is real because it's, again, it's not about giving you this hug, emotional, haha hug experience. It's really going, it's a truth that we acknowledge, that we must acknowledge, and then we are in this experience of the risk assessment, and then we're in the experience of value versus like risk versus reward, or cost versus benefit, right? So, and when you're experiencing the fear so intensely, then it of course goes, this is so feeling like not worth it, right? This sucks, this is not fun. Exactly. And so I know. But what's beautiful about this, and just stay with me for a second, it sounds all doom and gloom, but where I'm going with this is then getting super, like, leaning into that darkness. And I talk about this in life coaching too, and personal healing, and almost in spiritual development as well. But it's very relevant in my experience with skydiving because I've absolutely had those same thoughts. Absolutely. There you go, Chris. See, like, totally normal.
Feel better.
Totally normal. And that then brings us to the question of really thinking about the situations in which we think it is probable that we could die, and which situations it is less probable that we could die, right? And this is how I did it. So again, I would invite you into your own process around this reflection and contemplation. But for me, to get through that, and I'm not saying I'm through it like there's an achievement, I feel like this is a thought that can come up in a recurring way. But for me, it came down entirely to my boundaries and understanding what do I feel safe to participate in and what don't I. So part of my story is that 2-year break where I had this big burnout, my life imploded on every level. It's like comical life breakdown. But that was, also one of the greatest gifts of my whole life. But that led to me taking 2 years off from skydiving, partly because I was afraid, and partly because one of my friends died, who was just totally, totally normal. So I don't know if you know Jessica Edgington, but when she died, it was a huge wake-up call to me to be like, she was just coaching. She was just doing a day of coaching, just like I would be doing. And she just wasn't paying attention. She was just probably tired, burned out, wanting to go home, just where I was. And so I was like, fuck, girl, you got to get your shit together. And that really motivated me to take my break. Obviously, because of other life circumstances, I needed more time down. So I don't think that's necessarily relevant to every case. But what it incited me to do was to really, when I did start to re-engage the sport and I started to jump again, I had to really think about, how do I want to engage skydiving? And for me, it was getting current, was doing a hop and pop with my friends. So no one else was around me. Like, I basically needed a really easy way to re-enter. Then it was, I just want to go back to my fucking roots, man. I want to coach basic belly skills, and I want to coach newbies, and I love doing that, and I feel totally safe. I can control those environments. Like, it felt very much an environment that I could control. Like, I know who's in front of me. I know who's behind me. I can pull high. I can, I had like all these different competing forces of, this was an environment in which I felt safe. If you were to ask me to be on a vertical head down 20 way at that time, no fucking chance in hell. I would have been terrified. And I'm still working through my fear in those bigger wave vertical jumps because of the multiple people, because there's less that one can control. And that's why it's so important to believe in and trust your organizers and trust the environments you're in. So the camps are actually, I think, more scary than the actual like record tryouts and the actual record attempts, because you're in an environment where people have been selected. Does that make sense? So it's really, it became all about those environments. Who and what am I willing to skydive with? And that made a huge difference on my fear of death. I mean, and again, knock on wood, but like it certainly can happen to any of us at any time, but that helped me a lot.
No, that makes sense. And what you're saying too, like friends going in, that was hitting at the same time.
Yeah.
And we did take time off. And so it's now got back into it. And we know we love it. So it's having to force yourself to work through that. But it's helpful. Like, what are you comfortable? Like, make sure you're in a happy, comfortable jump.
And being okay with not doing things that you used to do. Like for me, I was skydive. I was Elsinore for fucking 10 years. And I had to really be like, I am not the same person I was. And I'm not going to do the same things that I was. And I had to learn how to be brave to say that as well. Because I was afraid people just wouldn't want to hire me or wouldn't want to, you know, like they would judge me. I was afraid of socially, you know, like all the nonsensical things that we worry about that are connected to these choices that we make. So I know we're almost out of time and I'm really respectful of time. So I really want to share really fast the last screens of the thing, because the final thoughts are this, is the validation. Fear is totally normal. It's often not discussed. So let's change that, which we're doing. We have a way to deal with any future fear. So we have ways to deal with it. And we're in this together, which I know sounds kind of cheesy, but I really believe that. And so that kind of was reminiscent about talking about it and trusting our people. And I just really invite you guys into this process. And I thank you. And there's the links and all that, but I'll send those to you in an email after this. But really, guys, I appreciate you for spending this time and being so vulnerable and open and just sharing. It's just really, really good stuff. So full respect, rock and roll. Hit me up in an email. I'll send you guys an email on the Eventbrite. We'll go from there. But thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mel. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much for
Thanks.
providing the safe
Bye,
environment.
guys.
Everybody have an awesome rest of the day.
Yeah.